amounts of money out of the country.
Yes, and that, as a matter of fact, recently, I mean, today maybe it was not just, I mean, because there are three steps. I mean, there are the money which is inside, within the country, which is this, this decision is made to freeze that money or those assets. In the same time, there are some money overseas, and it was asked 2 weeks ago in order to locate them and try to figure out, investigate, and further investigation to figure out where they are and how much they are. You know, at the beginning it was raised, the issue of this between $40 billion and $70 billion. Nobody knows the number exactly, but it's that range. So anyway, recently said that even today was announced somehow in some news reports that some of the money from Britain was moved to Swiss and in other names on different accounts. So this is going to be like an interesting process to figure out exactly how serious the new people in power are serious to investigate and to follow this money, or show me the money, as we said.
Yeah, that's one tranche of it. The other is political reform.
Yes.
They're looking at constitutional amendments. And we mustn't forget that there are still protests going on in Egypt.
Yes,
people
and then there is this mistrust towards the government, especially considering the Prime Minister himself, Dr. Ahmed Shafi, and other members of the cabinet as like the people of Mubarak, or let's say Mubarak man. So anyway, this is first of all, and the amendment changed that now they are talking about the beginning of April to make a referendum. And already there is a talk yesterday, as a matter of fact, the Supreme Council of Military Forces were meeting the representatives of youth and the revolution and all these people and different groups, and they came out of it saying that elections, parliamentary elections may take place in June, and the presidential election may take place in August. So it's people are trying to force things to
very quick turnaround.
I mean, we'll see how it's going to happen. Yet there are a lot of questions about how serious is the council to do these things and how it's going to secure to be fair and free elections.
Very important questions. Thomas, thanks very much indeed for that. Thomas Gorgisian with us in the studio. In Yemen, the opposition says it won't join a unity government. Instead, it says it's supporting popular demands for the resignation of President Ali Abdullah Saleh and an end to his 3-decade rule. The news came as something of a surprise to the government, who said on Monday that President Saleh was prepared to give the opposition ministerial posts. Hashim Albra reports from Sana'a.
Rehearsing for the big day. Anti-government protesters outside Sana'a University. A huge rally is expected Tuesday, and for the first time, the opposition plans to join pro-democracy demonstrators in what they are calling a day of fury. This square just off the university campus has been the epicenter for demonstrations against the government. From there, organizers plan to march through the streets of the capital.
Despite pledges by President Ali Abdullah Saleh to enact democratic reforms, these young people are saying that they have made up their mind, that they have crossed the point of no return, and that they will continue their fight to bring down the government and the political elite in Yemen.
Please, 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 please leave our country before it's coming too late. Please leave our country, leave our country. We don't need anymore. If you love us, please leave us.
But Saleh isn't willing to leave. In this gathering with his ruling party, he made it clear that he won't let the street overthrow what he insists is a democratically elected government. In a thinly veiled warning aimed at stemming the rise of defections among loyalists, he told his party that if he should fall, they would be next.
Ben Ali is gone, but is it calm now in Tunisia? Is it over? They want to get rid of the leadership, the inner circle and all the chain of command. They got rid of the first-tier leadership in Egypt. Now they want to get rid of the rest. I'm telling you, you have to be careful.
But warnings like these have not been enough to keep some of his most staunch supporters from losing faith. 11 members of the ruling party have already joined anti-government forces. along with one of the most senior tribal figures in Yemen. Saleh cautioned that his security forces were given strict orders to act in self-defense. Threats are likely to dissuade the demonstrators from massing on this square for what they hope will be a turning point in their fight for democratic changes. Hashim Al-Barra, Al Jazeera, Sana'a.
Coming up, we have updates of our top stories, including a report on the thousands of Egyptian workers who fled across the border from Libya into Tunisia. Plus, the nurse said to be Muammar Gaddafi's constant companion isn't so constant anymore. She's flown home to Ukraine. And from Iraq, the story of a former British security officer given a life sentence for murder.
It's filled with surprises, yet with a touch of the familiar. It's all those things you imagined, and some you didn't. It intrigues and fascinates, and often delights. It's a story of the world, and it's one with many endings. The 5-star global network fly to over 90 destinations on board one of the world's youngest fleets. Qatar Airways, world's 5-star airline.
As geeks take on dictators, bloggers turn dissidents, and social networks root for social justice, governments are going cyber, spying on their citizens, erecting firewalls like iron curtains, and closing down websites. We ask, is cyber-generated change virtual or real? Empire at this time on Al Jazeera.
Welcome back. You're watching the Al Jazeera News Hour. Egypt's former President Hosni Mubarak and his family have been issued with a travel ban by the country's public prosecutor pending further investigations. He's also ordered a freeze on their financial assets inside the country. Yemen's opposition says it will not join a unity government with the president. Political groups and anti-government protesters want the president to stand down. Tens of thousands of people have been protesting against his leadership. In the Libyan city of Misrata, gunfire has erupted between government supporters and protesters. There are also reports of Libyan warplanes bombing an ammunition depot held by the opposition near the city of AlJazeera. Well, thousands of migrant workers have fled Libya after the outbreak of violence. Our correspondent James Bays is at the Tunisian port town of AlJazeera, where thousands of Egyptians are waiting to travel back home.
They are carrying all their belongings on their backs. These are Egyptians who made their way out of Libya. Many of them have been stuck in the border area for days. Finally, they're able to leave on this Egyptian naval vessel. This is the Shalatain, the first of 4 Egyptian Navy ships which will be coming here in the next few days. Egyptians also going out by air, but many are still stuck in the border area and they're pretty angry. We heard them chanting earlier on that they wanted help from their government and they weren't having enough help from their government in the last few days. The problem the Tunisian authorities face is that slowly people are leaving, but more seem to still be arriving from Libya.
Well, obviously, there's a huge scramble for foreign nationals to leave Libya. Western countries have been trying to evacuate their citizens using ships and aircraft. Let's go back to Felicity in London for more on that effort.
Well, Sheila, the European Union says most of its almost 10,000 citizens in Libya have now left the country. Britain continued to evacuate its nationals by sea and by air on Sunday and says that most who want to leave have done so. The EU's crisis response chief says that most of the 650 EU citizens who remain are in hard-to-reach areas, making their rescue difficult. Many of those being evacuated are, of course, oil workers. Well, the EU says Libya's Muammar Gaddafi no longer controls most of the country's oil and gas fields. EU ministers are meeting in Brussels to discuss both the unrest in Libya and its impact on oil supplies. Daily oil production in Libya has been slashed from 1.6 million barrels to about 850,000. And that's prompted Spain to cut highway speed limits in March to try to reduce its fuel consumption. So let's now take a look at just how the unrest in Libya is affecting its oil industry. Well, Libya produces just under 2% of the world's oil, but 85% of its crude is sent to European refineries. The biggest buyers are Italy, France, Germany and Spain. There, Libyan crude is turned into diesel and jet fuel. Well, production is continuing in Libya, but the fighting has resulted in a drop in output of about 50%. Access is also proving to be a problem. The tankers which normally deliver crude to Europe are being told to stay more than 160 kilometres offshore from some Libyan ports and wait until it is safe to dock. Well, Dr. Manucher Takin, a senior analyst from the Centre for Global Energy Studies, says the world is prepared to cope with those changes in Libya's oil output.
There is a mismatch, a teething problem, which will be for a few weeks, maybe a month or so. But Saudi Arabia is producing, has already increased production so that they can supply. There's a different type of crude. It has to be transported from the Persian Gulf all the way. So there is an element on this. The International Energy Agency, the Industrialized Countries Center, they can have, again, they can replace the oil by emergency rationing. They have strategic reserves. So it is not the end of the world.
Well, one person who's been by Muammar Gaddafi's side for almost 10 years is his Ukrainian nurse, but she's one of the latest of his entourage to desert the Libyan leader. As Neve Barker reports.
Returning to Ukraine after 9 years at Gaddafi's side, 38-year-old Galina Kolodnitskaya is met by family at Kiev airport. She arrived with hundreds of foreign evacuees. Her story distinctly different from the many others fleeing the violence in Libya. In these undated pictures, Kolodnitskaya stands close to the heart of the Gaddafi regime. She was one of 4 Ukrainian nurses taking care of him, but a US diplomatic cable published by WikiLeaks late last year claimed the Libyan leader was deeply attached to Kolodnitskaya. The cable described her as a voluptuous blonde who always travelled with the Gaddafi as only she knew his routine. It's believed the two may have been romantically involved. Back in Ukraine, Kolodnitskaya is avoiding public attention, all while Gaddafi's leadership teeters precariously. Neve Barker, Al Jazeera, Moscow.
And you're up to date with the latest here in Europe. Back now to Doha.
So to Oman now, where in the city of Sohar, a major supermarket billowed smoke after it had been looted, according to witnesses. And protesters are blocking roads to 2 of the country's main export ports on Monday. A doctor said 6 people had died in the industrial city a day earlier during clashes with police. However, the health minister says 1 person died and 20 were injured. In Bahrain, a parliament meeting has been cancelled after protesters stopped upper chamber members from reaching the entrance. Rallies have been held in key Manama locations to put pressure on the monarchy to bring change. King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa has reshuffled his cabinet and appealed for talks with the opposition. And in Jordan, opposition leaders are continuing to demand a greater pace of reform. That's despite the promise of new laws this year by the Prime Minister. Meanwhile, at least 5,000 supporters of King Abdullah gathered in Amman on Sunday to show their allegiance to the royal family. The loyalist rally comes after opposition protests that have been held on 8 consecutive Fridays. An Iraqi court has sentenced a former British security contractor to life in prison for killing 2 contractors. Danny Fitzsimmons is the first Westerner to be convicted by an Iraqi court since the 2003 invasion. He was found guilty of murdering 2 of his colleagues in 2009. The 30-year-old said he acted in self-defense. Jane Arif has the latest from Baghdad.
It's a fascinating case because you have to look a bit at the circumstances, and part of the reason why the court here decided that they would be somewhat lenient, if you will, was that he has a troubled background. This is a former British paratrooper who was about to stand trial for assault, had a rather troubled background when he came as a security contractor to work for the Armour Group in Baghdad. Days after he arrived, he got into a drunken brawl and shot 2 of his co-workers and wounded an Iraqi. Given that, it's very difficult to make the defense that he was completely innocent. Now, the wider picture of this is the first trial of a Westerner and the first trial of a security contractor in an Iraqi court since